And we're live. So, everyone, this is my good friend and former landlord, Jonathan Liang. Welcome, Jonathan. Would you like to just introduce to people who you are and to anyone who doesn't know you, what you're up to in life?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, like David said, I am his former or was his former landlord. And he left to also start his own real estate journey. Yeah, my name's Jonathan. I was born in New Jersey, not far also from where David grew up, but grew up the majority of my childhood in San Diego, and then came over to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to college at Emory University. And yeah, fast forward to today, I am a technology consultant at Deloitte, and I also have lots of entrepreneurial ventures, ambitions, and yeah, I guess experimentations that I like to call it.
Yeah. So, one of my first questions is you told me that your parents are entrepreneurs as well. Um, how do you feel like being raised by entrepreneurs skews your career view compared to someone who's just your typical 9 to 5 employee?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think maybe it's not about the career, right? Like maybe it's not about the entrepreneur aspect, but I do think it's really the values that they embodied as I was growing up. Both of my parents, neither of them were like, yeah, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, like when they grow up, right? Like they're not like, oh, when I grow up and I become an adult, it's like I'm going to be an entrepreneur or like I'm going to make, so and so much money. Like I think they were thrown into it by accident, uh, but I think their values were different than what you would call a 9 to 5, right? Because I mean, a lot of people are successful in their careers, and it might also be a more structured time block. Like we say 9 to 5, right? But like doctors, right, make a good living for themselves, but it's very structured, right? You have to follow the schedule of the hospital. The only difference, right, between a 9 to 5, someone who works in a 9 to 5 or a corporate job, and an entrepreneur is that they get to dictate their own time. And so, yeah, I think growing up, like, I think my parents were very ambitious, and whether they actively, tried to instill that type of ambition or teach that ambition to me, um, or not, like, it definitely rubbed off. And I think having that, definitely has its pros and cons, but in terms of like becoming an entrepreneur, in terms of like, yeah, just being ambitious, like, I think that is how it came off, I guess, for me.
Mm. What kind of experiences, I guess, growing up led you to develop like a love for business?
I don't know if it's a love for business, but it's just like an exposure to it, right? Like if both my parents are in business, so it's like I don't have exposure to someone who, is in the medical field, right? Like neither of my parents are in the medical field. I don't have exposure to those in academia. So it just so happened to be that both of my parents were in business. And so, yeah, I don't know if it was like an interest per se, as opposed to just like, okay, this is just what I know. And my parents also happen to be good at it.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I mean, as a kid, I think you just look up to your parents and you sort of question, like, oh, this might be like a possible, path for my life as well.
Gotcha. Hmm. So, with the ability to dictate your time, how does that create advantages for an entrepreneur, let's say, over like an employee that is stuck in a 9 to 5 structure?
Well, I feel like now we're living in an age, right, in 2024 where entrepreneurship is glorified, and there's a lot of hype around it. It's very socialized, ironically, by other entrepreneurs, right, because they're trying to increase their brand awareness. They're trying to build up their personal brand. But if you really dig deeper, I think also, based on like my own experience, that for the most part, the schedule of an entrepreneur is actually not nice at all. I mean, it's not comfortable, right? The idea of a 9 to 5 was for during the Industrial Revolution, right? Like it was a concept produced by factories and like the industrial companies of that area to basically increase the productivity of each worker. Because before, like if you think about it, before the Industrial Revolution, like people were just farmers. Like they just had a house maybe and had some land, and then they grew some kind of crop or raised some kind of livestock, and that was it. And so the schedule was like, in theory, they were technically like entrepreneurs, right? And so there was many studies done where they saw that people during the era, basically all the way up until the Industrial Revolution, they took like 1 to 2 hour naps a day in the afternoon. Like that would never happen. Like how many times you might have nap time when you were like in kindergarten, but since Industrial Revolution until now, no corporate job would ever give you a quote unquote 1 to 2 hour nap time just to do your job, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be like, oh, you're not working at that time. Why would we pay you for that time? And so, we kind of shifted from being farmers, then being workers, and that has kind of translated to, being like in this quote unquote 9 to 5 structure. But if you think about it, even from, I think it was like the 70s or 80s, they also tracked the amount of time that at least people in the US have worked on average from like a weekly and then daily basis. And it's actually less than what we did back in the 80s. Like the number of hours that we work today on average in corporate America is less than back then. And so it's technically has gotten better. I think the issue that people see for those who are attracted to quote unquote the good parts of entrepreneurship is quote unquote like how you dictate your time, which is true. You're dictating your time, but you're also in full control of your own livelihood with the business that you're trying to build.
Yeah, that's the tough part, right?
And yeah, I mean, in the beginning, you can be like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah, I can dictate my time. I'll work like, let's say 4 hours a day instead of 8 hours a day. But those 4 hours of the day must be pretty darn good, like spent very productively. Otherwise, your entire salary, or I guess in this case, revenue, is dependent on those 4 hours that you spent trying to work on your business. That's why companies want workers to work 8 hours a day, because that's 8 hours of productivity that they can, almost guarantee from their employee towards their own business, right? If you're the CEO of, some Fortune 500 company. So all that to say, I think it's not necessarily a good thing. Like if anything, I feel like a 9 to 5 structure is better. Of course, there are some jobs, right, that like might work you more than just simply a 9 to 5, right? Like they may work you a little bit longer, right? You might have seasons where you're burning out maybe because you're really working for longer periods of time, for an extended period of time. But I think the key difference is that you're being told what to do. And that's essentially what entrepreneurship is, right? Like people don't like, reporting to someone else. They don't like having their own, having a direct report, but they'd rather be their own boss. And I think there's a distinction between being your own boss and dictating your own time. Like both of those are true, but dictating your own time is sort of, I don't know, almost like a misnomer or like a contradictory thing to say, because yes, you dictate your own time, but most entrepreneurs, if they're really dedicated to either A, surviving, or B, passionate about their business, they're going to work like much more than 8 hours a day.
But when you are your own boss, I heard someone say this, like if you get to dictate what you do, it can feel a lot more energizing maybe than someone else telling you what to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the idea, right? Or that's the ethos maybe that entrepreneurs may not always say, but then they embody, is that yes, they want to be their own boss because they have the freedom and also the autonomy to make decisions for themselves, and they own up to the decisions that they make. They're not at the mercy of another company that they work for or another person.
Yeah.
Right. They're not dealing with other relational, I guess, obstacles that are in their way.
Yeah.
They're choosing to essentially go solo, right? I mean, you always need other people, I think, in your life to help build yourself up, like build your, company up, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
but you're not like bound to that.
Yeah.
You can choose whether to, interact with a certain person, or maybe you choose to just not talk to someone anymore because it's maybe not fruitful to you. Maybe they're like, causing stress to your mental health or something like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where my mind went when you first told me, like, being raised by entrepreneurs kind of like skewed your career review, because I was always thinking, like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're like solely responsible for people's salaries, your own salary, um, you're almost like forced to be extremely practical. Like, I think when we work as employees, sometimes we have to like climb the corporate ladder or like play the game. And there's a lot of like fluff and like social games, that people play, like the political games that people play, to like win favor with certain people. And it's just like all this, to me, I see that as like an unnecessary like bureaucracy kind of thing. And it's not what I'm being paid by the company to do. Like, I think a pure image of work, in my opinion, is like I'm paid to create a product or to render a service. And from the company's point of view, they're hiring me to do that. And ideally, I would want to know exactly how to do that at the highest quality possible. And then just like do that transaction, so to speak, like, give the company what they hired me for at the highest quality that I can manage. And then I go home and I enjoy like my life. But unfortunately, I think a lot of people do struggle with like stressors or like relational dynamics, hierarchies, etc. And it's like some of the most important knowledge that you need to succeed in a job is like, I almost see it as like there's like this innermost circle of like a few people who kind of know like all the company specific secrets. And you have to, as a new hire, you're kind of like on the outer edges, and you have to very slowly like, network and play the game and kind of like brown nose or like kiss ass to win favor with people so that they're willing to share with you some of the secrets. But it's like, in my ideal, like, I understand like job security and all that, but in my ideal, it's like all that's kind of unnecessary. And I feel like as an entrepreneur, if you can kind of like do away with all the inefficiencies, you can just directly like um, give a service or product to the customer. And I guess ideally that would be nice. Um, but yeah, just like the structure, I guess, or like the relational hierarchical inefficiencies. Like, do you have any viewpoints on, like, is there something that I'm not seeing? Like, do entrepreneurs have to deal with like things that come up that employees don't have to deal with, etc.?
I mean, it's funny that you say, like, you use the word ideal like multiple times in your spiel just now, right? And I think that's what it is, right? It'd be nice, right? Everything sounds nice in theory. Everything sounds nice when you try to play it in your head or you're playing it out in your head. Unfortunately, I think politics will never go away. That's why they teach political science in schools, right? Like, it's not just to become a politician. If that were to, if I'm not a political science expert, but if that was the major that you pick to like try and like get into government, like, I don't think that's the only reason to study political science, because we are human beings, and human beings are relational by nature. Because otherwise, if you take out the relational part in anything that you do, then we're just robots. Like, we're not human beings, right? Like, you might as well just like, fast forward like 100 years from now, where we have, you know, artificial general intelligence. Like,
Ooh.
yeah, machines can just do everything for us, and that's fine. But like, as human beings, that's not how we work, right? Like, you care about relationships, you care about your mom, your dad, your wife, your husband, your children, and the same goes for it in the workplace. Like, yes, in the 9 to 5 structure, there might be these different things where, like, as you say, quote, like, play the game. Playing the game might look something very different, right? Like, in government, they're all playing the game, right? We always say like, oh, politicians are, bad or sleazy or whatever, but they're also playing the game because they're also doing the same thing in corporate America of whatever it is. Like, I don't know, maybe they're trying to like pass certain policies for their own constituents, right? Or maybe, there are obviously politicians that are still corrupt, and maybe they're trying to do things that are selfish for their own gain. Um, and it sounds nice, like you said, that if you go into entrepreneurship, that you just can, like, quote unquote, be more efficient, productive, however you want to call it. But politics will exist everywhere you go. Um, and I think I learned that the hard way in my first venture. Like, I feel like you're gonna touch upon it, but going at it solo and quote unquote being the most efficient, productive that you can be, I think there's two things that's flawed with it. One is because you choose not to employ other people, you're always going to be scaling linearly in your progress as a business owner. And if anything, when you scale linearly, you can also very easily plateau. But most people don't view business as an exponential type of growth. Like, in the beginning, you might have a lot of negative or like seemingly decreasing return, and you might like not make any progress for a while. But once you have kind of built a foundation for your business, like, the growth becomes exponential. Whereas if you think about a 9 to 5 job, and the way that a lot of people, including myself, think, is that you get a job, you have a salary, maybe after a year or two you get a promotion and another raise, and it just keeps going like that. And so in that type of growth, it isn't linear, and that's why it's easy to think like, okay, if I do XYZ, get feedback on ABC and fix those things, like, I can like incrementally make progress in that fashion. But that's also like, that's not mutually exclusive from, I guess, quote unquote, playing the game, or like considering politics, if you want to call it that. But the way I view things is that building relationships, and like, I guess, being good at relationship building, relationship growth, maintenance, is vital, not only to yourself, but just like everyone around you, all the work that surrounds you, and just even for yourself, right? Like, you want to, like, everyone wants, like, good quality relationships with their friends, with their parents, with their siblings. And entrepreneurship is no different. If anything, it's harder because, you're competing against other people, I guess, as a business owner, right? Like, you're always going to have competition with other businesses. But if anything, relationships are even more important, because before, in the 9 to 5, you're basically just stuck in this structure and a set, salary that you're given every year, right? But you're paid out like every 2 weeks. But in entrepreneurship, like, that, you don't have a structure. There is no structure. You are dictating that structure, and in order to have a good foundation of the structure you're trying to build with your company, the only way that you can do that is by building a relationship with other people. And that's why entrepreneurs might go to like conferences, or they go to a lot of networking events, because they understand that politics, if viewed and used in a positive light, like, is very beneficial to them, because no one person can do it on their own. If you look at every successful person out there, if we're talking about like business and entrepreneurship, like, all those people like definitely had help along the way. Jeff Bezos, like, his wife like helped him so much, like when he was building Amazon in the beginning days. Apple had Steve Wozniak, like Steve Jobs didn't know how to code. Like, it was all Steve Wozniak's technology, right? Bill Gates also had, blanking on his name, but like him and the other person like co-founded Microsoft. Like, it wasn't just Bill Gates. Like, there are people surrounding these people that also helped them get to where they are. Even Elon Musk, like, we see him as like running like 5, 6 different companies. He, like, for his first company, like, he had a co-founder as well, right? And like, the real money that he made when he co-founded PayPal, like, there were like multiple co-founders on that initial team, including, was it Peter Thiel and a few other folks. So nothing is a one-man show. It's easy to be like, oh yeah, we'll just be like increase our technical skills or our efficiency or our productivity. But like, in reality, that's never going to work, because your progress will be linear. And it's just more fun. It's more fun to build relationships and bring people along the way on your journey.
Wow. Okay. I guess the good part about relationships is that exponential growth, but there is sometimes costs to playing the game, right? Mental health, uh, physical health. So I guess like to you, what's a way of playing the game such that you can still maintain good mental health, good physical health? When do you know, and also when do you know that it's not going to work out and maybe you have to switch something up?
Are you talking about purely in like about relationships, you mean?
I mean, we can talk about relationships, but I guess I'm more wondering about at work because I feel like outside of work, if someone's being toxic, you can kind of say like no, or like leave me alone kind of a thing. But I feel like at work, if you're forced to cooperate with a team, it's not as easy to like assert hard boundaries like that.
So I guess, well, let me try to recap. So you're asking like when you're dealing with other people in entrepreneurship, like
Or
how do you manage that, or what is the, I guess what are you trying to ask in particular?
it doesn't have to be just in entrepreneurship, but just whenever you're working, in the pursuit of making money, and you kind of have to like play the game, politics or relationship building, maintenance, etc. And you're feeling like it's starting to tax your mental health or maybe even your physical health because you're spending so much time, let's say, uh, working and not enough time like taking care of your body, getting enough sleep, uh, putting in the time to exercise, etc. Um, just like what do you think a person can do to kind of like keep their mental and physical health going good while working?
Yeah, well, I think a few things. I would never. I don't think I would want to use the term like play the game. I think I used to use that term more in my own vocabulary.
So
But
self talk is already a big factor.
yeah,
How
yeah. I
you
mean,
see
like,
things,
I mean,
which
if you
words you
view it
use.
as just relationship building, I mean, that just sounds so much better, right? Like you build relationships at church, you build relationships within your family, in your friend group. And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's part of. I guess there is risk. There's always risk in everything, right? Like friends come and go. That's just the way life is. Like they might have been a great friend during a particular season of life, and they might go, and like that's okay. But like, it's better to still participate than to not, right? Like again, if you don't, we're all just gonna be robots. Like we're no different from the machine. But as human beings, I think it's vital for us to be social, like to build relationships, and yeah, I think like if you view we're talking about work and we're viewing, networking or relationship building as quote unquote playing the game, like of course you're gonna like burn out. Like you're not viewing it as something that I guess you're not viewing it as something that's natural.
Life giving, maybe.
Say that again.
Life giving.
I mean, yeah, I mean
I
it's
think
life
of like
giving.
I think of neglected babies, like emotionally neglected babies physically will like be more likely to die.
Right, right. And that's just evident, right, scientifically of that like we are relational creatures. Like and yeah, I mean going back to the whole like what do you do to um I guess like place your importance on building relationships? Like I mean that's just setting boundaries. Like for those of you who are like burning out, like not eating regularly, not exercising, like not getting enough sleep, if you're like sacrificing these things at the cost of relationship building or like you say playing the game, like that that's just setting boundaries. Like that's just like knowing yourself and being okay to say no. Maybe like in 2024 I feel like it's very easy for all of us to say yes to everything because we have FOMO and we just like fear that we're going to miss out on something happening, but you're really not missing out. And you're really not like gonna like ruin your career because you missed like one networking event. I had one networking event yesterday for Deloitte, and like I just chose not to go because I didn't want to go. I wanted to spend some time, with Alicia, my fiance, and some of her friends because I haven't, really talked with them that much. And I'm like, yeah, like that's the priority and the boundary that I set. Like, yeah, I could go to that networking event and made some connections, but with all things in life, you if you go all in on something at the expense of other things, like of course you're gonna burn out because that's why they call it work life balance. Like you have to know what your priorities are, what your tolerance is, and from there decide how much you would want to contribute to, networking, relationship building, as well as to the other parts of your life.
Mm. Speaking of your fiance, so I was at your engagement party and I was talking to one of your friends, and um, I was curious, like, how he met you and all that. And he said, like, yeah, I've always known Jonathan to be kind of like a visionary. Like, he was always thinking of ventures and ways to like create value through business. And that's something that living with you, I kind of saw as well. Like, you definitely think about ways to, yeah, create businesses, or you're analyzing, startups and what kind of value they're providing. So I guess, like, yeah, like, when did this whole visionary mindset start? Like, do you recall the first time you're thinking of how cool it would be to start a business? And
Um, yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I never thought about that. But yeah, I guess thanks for that. Uh, it's sometimes I feel like you have like imposter syndrome because you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just like doing my thing. Like, it doesn't mean anything, but like, just by you saying that, like, that's, pretty cool to hear. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I actively was like, oh, like, I'm just gonna like try and start a business now. Like, I think it was just like a natural progression, maybe out of my own curiosity. But the first time I ever got into like any kind of like, I guess officially into any kind of like, um, finance, like investing, like entrepreneurship type of, like, if we're talking about that realm of thinking and like building interest in, was in high school. I asked my parents like for some money because I wanted to start investing in the stock market. And this is when Robinhood, like the Robinhood app, like first came about, and I was like, "Wow, this is so cool! Like, it's a startup, and like they're offering like no fees on every stock trade." And like I just knew nothing about stock trading. I just thought it was a cool startup.
mm,
Um, but I think it definitely helps looking in hindsight, and I'm grateful for my parents to just like, they probably knew that I knew nothing about stock trading, but they still gave me a little bit of money to experiment with. And yeah, I mean, even that, right? Like Robinhood itself is like, it was a startup at the time. Like, no one really knew about it. All the big, brokerage firms like didn't care anything about it. Like, they just kind of scoffed at it.
mhm.
In a way, I was investing in Robinhood by being a participant. And the
It's not
funny
doing so
thing,
well right now, right, Robinhood?
I don't know. I haven't checked recently.
Oh,
I haven't been following as closely. I can't use Robinhood anymore, like while I'm at Deloitte, because it's like an audit firm.
oh,
But side note, anyways, but the first stock that I essentially bet big in, like if anyone looked at my portfolio back then when I was in high school, uh, and looked at it now, they'd be like, "You're nuts." Like at the time, I mean. But
oh,
if you looked at it now and you looked at me investing in that portfolio then, they're still gonna say, "Oh, you're nuts," but then at the same time, they're gonna be like, "You're a genius." And basically, what I did was I put like 90% of the money that my parents gave into Tesla, and it was trading at like less than $100 a share
mm. Before all the splits
before
too.
the splits. And
Yeah.
so, like, yeah, if I actually held on to like the money the entire time until today, like, I mean, I wouldn't be here talking. I'd be retired or something. But like, um, yeah, I mean, like my parents obviously were trying to like give advice and stuff, and ended up still making a positive return, but like it was very standard as opposed to um, what it could have been, I guess. But
Mm.
everyone can say what if, but I think there's a difference of just like taking the action for me to be like, hey, look, this cool company like Robinhood and like this cool company called Tesla, that was for the most part under the radar compared to today.
Mm. Gotcha. Yeah. Uh, Definitely more to go into with that in the future. I can't really get my thoughts straight, but I'm just thinking about like inherent value in a company. I'm thinking about what's his name? Uh, Something Kitty, the GameStop guy. He just kept on doubling down on GameStop when everyone was like, "You're crazy," and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
Roaring Kitty, and then he ended up making, I mean, well over retirement funds from that. So, yeah, more to dive into, and I guess next time. Yeah, I guess maybe to some people in our community, you might come off as like this mysterious guy because you're so like locked into, the things that you are passionate about. I know that you came off that way to me. Like when I first visited the house, Eddie was showing me around, and I was like, "Wow, you're living in such a nice place now. It's pretty cool." And then he was giving me the tour, and he's like, "Yeah, this is the landlord's room." And I was like, "Oh, you live with your landlord? That's interesting." And he's like, "Yeah, he's out right now. He's working on an Airbnb stuff." I was like, "Dang!" So this guy owns a house, and he's not even home because he's working on other stuff with the Airbnb. Like, wow, I gotta meet this guy because I'm kind of interested in real estate as well. So yeah, definitely like there was this mysterious air because you're just so busy doing your thing, and I guess it's hard for other people to know like what you're up to. Um, but I had the privilege of learning a little bit of what you're up to. There's a Porsche in your life. Do you care to explain a little bit to the people,
Yeah.
dispel some of the mystery behind the Porsche story?
Yeah. Well, for those of you out there, don't buy a Porsche, especially if you know that it's not within your means. Um, but yeah, I guess it's just like I personally like cars. Like I've always been interested in cars ever since I got my license, and so I guess that's just like an interest of mine. But I know that financially speaking, when we're talking about personal finances, like cars are like the worst possible investment that you can make. Like it's not even an investment; it's a straight up expense and liability. And yeah, I just came across like one of those like influencers who talk about like um, luxury assets. Like you kind of hear about like how rich people like purchase like art and not just real estate, but like art and like jewelry and different things to essentially like invest in. And so I was just like learning a lot about it, and I was like, hey, maybe I could buy a Porsche based on my current salary and based on what this guy's teaching. But long story short, basically the concept is that if you buy a car low enough with the right specifications, you can in theory enjoy a car for about like a year or so, or less, and then resell it for the price that you paid for it. So you're not really making money off buying a car, but at least you're not like you might have heard of the term like your car loses value the second you drive it off the lot, right? So you're trying to basically minimize that by driving a luxury vehicle with all these different conditions so that you can sell it at the price that you paid for it. That was the theory. So fast forward to today, I'm trying to sell the car, but at a much bigger discount than I initially paid for it. And yeah, for me, I don't know. I guess like I calculated the risk. I like cars. I've never purchased a nice car for myself. Not that like you should expect to as someone like in your 20s, but um yeah, I mean like I learned my lesson. Like I still enjoyed like driving it for like what over a year now. Um but yeah, I mean I aim to what's today's date? Like and closer to the end of January. Like I'm trying to sell that thing within the next month. Like in less than a month I'm trying to get rid of it because I know that it's not yeah, it's just I guess it's not providing value for me anymore. But it's fun experience to have. While owning it, it's now cool to have this story in my back pocket to say that I won a Porsche. But yeah, I mean it's cool nonetheless. And by no means was I trying to like pull out loans, or I guess by no means was I trying to go under my means to purchase the car. So, and the need was there, right? Because Alicia, like my fiance, like moved to Atlanta and she needed a car. So rather than her buying a car, I just let her use, my Honda, and had this kind of window of opportunity to try out this experiment.
Yeah, the other major thing was Airbnb. I'm sure that taught a lot of lessons as well. Yeah, just do you care to share some of what that process was like for people
Sure.
who don't
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So I had an Airbnb. I would kind of label this as like my first venture into like real estate. Well, not real estate, but just entrepreneurship in general, formally. Um, I think like close friends who know me, like you said, like I always like talking about like entrepreneurship and like business and startups and stuff, and this is my interest. And um, I remember during COVID, another friend of mine, or two friends of mine and I, we were like, oh, let's basically start some type of side hustle that we're all interested in and like keep each other accountable. And 1 year after that, like no one made any progress, like zero, zip. Like the only thing I did was maybe like buy a domain name. Yeah, I bought like one domain name for what I wanted to call the business, and that was it. That domain name is what I ended up using to, uh, you know, basically start this Airbnb venture. But yeah, I essentially just like found a course and I just kind of committed to it. I think like that's the biggest thing. Like I think I was tired of just like talking about things and like not really doing the things that I say I'm interested in doing. And so, um, I wouldn't recommend it to do it when you're burnt out or have another job, which is where I was at. But I think maybe I just wanted to get the itch out, and so yeah, essentially like did the whole thing. Like I bought the course, like invested in the course for like a whole month, learned everything that I could about Airbnb from that one person, and then I, set up an LLC, like did all the business formation stuff, and yeah, I essentially set up an Airbnb solo. Like contracted some work within like 2 months. 2 months, like including the course, setting it up and listing it onto the Airbnb site. Wow. But the problem was that at the end of that, I was like so burnt out. Like I just thought it would be easy money. Like I could just coast and I would just let it ride. And yeah, essentially for the next like year and a half, almost like it was essentially coasting. And I think I learned a lot because, well, it taught me a lot about like business, right? But also taught me a lot about where are my priorities, like what does true work-life balance mean, especially as an entrepreneur. But I think the biggest thing it taught me is probably the importance of like bringing people along in your journey. Like the entire time, I like maybe asked for help like a couple times, right? Like even when Alicia like was around, like she helped a little bit, but for the most part, like it was a one-man show. If there was someone who was locked out of the Airbnb and it was midnight, like I drove down there to pretend that I was like quote unquote employee of my business to go like help them with the lock or with the thermostat or whatever it was. And so, yeah, it was a good experience for sure. But personally, like as a Christian, I feel like God was like not letting me do well in that area to teach me a lot of these lessons. But nonetheless, I think it was still a good experience. It's not a comfortable experience for sure, but I think I still learned a lot and definitely grateful for that.
Do you care to share for the people who are wondering what the numbers look like in that venture?
Yeah, well, so I basically did what is called Airbnb arbitrage for a lot of those influencers that are out there. And yeah, I basically rented like a single family home. I negotiated a lease for 1.5 years and I was aiming for 2 years. But thank God that didn't happen. And yeah, basically I used my savings to invest in a course, invest in the all the furniture, basically contractors to move and set up the furniture, and then money for an interior designer to basically help me design and like pick out the exact pieces of furniture and stuff. And yeah, so the rent was like $3,000 a month. I think total setup costs, including first month rent, first month rent, and then a security deposit was around 20 grand, I think. And yeah, I actually recouped all of that within, I want to say like 6 months or something like that. And then, but from there, basically, since I couldn't really scale and I wasn't focused as much, essentially by letting it coast, there were certain aspects of it that made it not as an attractive Airbnb. And so essentially, like, I didn't get enough foot traffic, or just like enough guests into the Airbnb where I had a consistent enough revenue where it was sustainable. And so I think I was like maybe like negative like 1,000 or so like in the first year. I guess like I'm doing the taxes now for 2023, but you know, I was like positive like a few $1,000. But you know, for all the headache and the time that I spent personally on it, like you know, definitely was not a good ROI, uh, return on investment. But yeah, no, it was good. It got me more interested. You know, despite all of that, it got me more interested in real estate. Right,
Yeah.
like it validated my interest in real estate just as an area of like you know business and like where I want to like invest my time in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to
And
see the parts
yeah,
moving in reality, right? Like you have an idea and then you set it into motion in the world, and it's just cool to
yeah,
see.
like if anything, that was like especially in the beginning, that was the biggest thing for me, right? Like I for like years, like since high school until like how old was I? Like 24 or something like that, 25. Like I just talked about business and like entrepreneurship. And
Yeah.
so I think maybe it was a COVID thing, but
Yeah.
like I was like, you know, I just want to commit to something and do it and try it out. And yeah, I think I really appreciated that about myself. Like looking back, that like yeah, I mean, as a one man show, like kind of crazy that I set up like a whole Airbnb,
Yeah.
you know, within that short amount of time. And it's not like a guest is gonna know like, hey, yeah, like this Airbnb is being run by like this like solo 25-year-old.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's good.
Um, one of the podcasters I listened to, he was like a engineer that on the side he was doing real estate. I don't know how he scaled to this level, but he was working with like $1 million properties, like strip malls or something like that. But he was like a full-time engineer, and um, I was kind of just listening to him talk about how he went from just a normal like W-2 employee to like this entrepreneur that could almost like replace his W-2 salary through his side gig, like building it up over time. Because I've always been interested in that trajectory, like looking at Shark Tank, for example. Like, you know, people have ideas, but it's very different thinking about an idea and feeling all the dopamine that comes when you can picture the ideal scenario of that playing out, and then enacting it in reality and being met with all the complications, etc., of reality. Um, but on Shark Tank, uh, I think a big reason why these investors like to give money to these people is they have a track record of the numbers showing how realistic their business is and the success. My dad's favorite being the Cilantro J guy, which I've seen his place in Austin, but never got to try it. Sad, but and he's still doing really well many years later. But anyway, this engineer guy, the biggest thing he wanted to teach was mindset, like being able to endure and keep producing wins, having that persistence, I guess, and grit when things are tough, seems to be very core to him, you know, transitioning from just this engineer to everything that he built. Do you also like have experiences where there were like the valleys, and what did you do mindset wise? What were you thinking that got you through those moments?
You don't think. um, I think having endurance, perseverance, commitment, like all those three combined is still not enough to summarize like how much of all three of those elements you need to get through it.
Wow.
I had it for those like 2 months basically when I set up the Airbnb, but then what happened was I just assumed that by the time I finished setting up the Airbnb that I'm done. But if I was really thinking long term and like setting up a business, like I needed, you know, in hindsight, like something bigger than myself to keep me going. Otherwise, like and each person is different, right? Like some people might have just like a super high tolerance, right? And it may take them like a lot more to basically wear them down. But for me, I was working like what 10, 12 hour days at Deloitte, and like I started this Airbnb out of frustration of my 9 to 5. I mean, really 8 to 10. um, and so, I only had so much time to basically set up this Airbnb. I worked a full work day. And then on top of that, in any extra free time I had was to set up the Airbnb. And so for me, I don't think it was a question of like perseverance, endurance, or commitment. It was really the fact that I just like didn't have enough time, and my priorities were, upside down, right? Like I didn't during that time I barely like talked to the roommates, like to friends, to family.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I mean, I guess like you have to have values and the vision much much bigger and long term than whatever you're currently thinking, probably, in order to sustain yourself like in the long term,
Mm.
because you're just that's how you burn out. Like if you are already thinking about like how long you're working, like the long hours, like, how am I going to manage this? Like, how am I going to like, have my work life balance? Like, you're already almost like one step closer to failing because you're not really dedicated and like passionate about what it is that you're trying to do, right? Like, I mean, entrepreneurship could cover anything. It could be
Yeah.
this podcast that you're building, like, could be real estate, could be, being a social media creator. Like, it's so many different things, but it's like if you're only in it for the money or whatever short term thing that is,
Yeah.
like, it's a very high chance that you're probably just going to burn out,
Yeah.
especially if you're already working a 9 to 5 job and you're trying to like build something on the side,
Yeah.
because you're not bothered. Like, most entrepreneurs are not thinking about work life balance. They're thinking about
The value
the
that.
long term vision that they have set themselves to and committed themselves to. And that's where the perseverance and endurance comes from, because
Yeah.
they care about that delayed gratification, whatever that vision is,
Mm.
more than anything else. They could care less about like, you know, I mean, I'm trying to downplay anything, but like, they might not value certain things that we typically do, uh, in the day to day. Like maybe they're sacrificing hang out with friends on the weekends. Like maybe it's only like once a month or something like
Mm.
that. I mean, it could look like a lot of different things, and the combination of any one of those things, and each person's life is different. But
Yeah.
if you're solely dedicated to trying to build something as an entrepreneur, like that commitment, endurance, perseverance aspect cannot be emphasized more enough. But it's only comes from a source that is much bigger than yourself
Mm.
for the long haul.
Yeah. When you were talking about your not 9 to 5, but 8 to 10 work days, and then instead of relaxing at home, you're working on the Airbnb side hustle. Um, it got me thinking a little bit. You weren't dating at the time, right? When you first set up the
Actually,
Airbnb?
that's when I just started dating.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm really amazed by that because I feel like I personally have experienced this kind of like compromise between dating and also the amount of mental effort and strategy and time that goes into work, producing results at work, but also and like relationships at work, but also like side hustle and like the strategy that goes into that and calculating the risk and all of that. Um, I feel like there is this compromise where it's like, sometimes when you're dating, your partner will want you to express like affection, but maybe like the time it takes you to express that, or uh, I mean, for me, I think it was the time. Like I think uh, I could I could express it in the way that she wanted, but it was more like the time it took for me to figure that out. It was just like not meshing with um, all the time it took for me to succeed at work and also at side hustle type things. Because, with side hustle, one portion is like figuring it out, but also it's like you have to invest a certain amount of time with courses, with education, that kind of thing. And I was just thinking, like, I think it's pretty important for people who have ambition to also be with partners that are like self validating, or they have like delayed gratification, like they're able to still be around if you do a deep dive into your work. Because I mean, I guess the Christian perspective is like husbands are supposed to that die for their wives in a similar way that Jesus like died for the church. And there are scriptures saying, like from Paul, that are saying, if a man fails to provide for his family, it's like he has denied the faith. So there is this like, and God is a provider, and humans are made in the image of God. So I think there is that longing to be a provider, even if we're not the actual provider. But I just think it's such a tough compromise when it's like you're not even able to work because of the demands for affection, etc. Because that work in the long term view, it's for your partner, but maybe it's not what they're asking for. Like they're asking for affection here and now, but you're thinking like, well, long term, I want to make sure we're in a safe neighborhood, we're able to, have nice experiences, go out on the weekends, etc. Even if that's not directly what they're asking for, I would say that's probably the most genuine expression of love that you can do for your family. So I guess what I'm trying to ask with all this is like, what are your thoughts on like dating and denied gratification and like self-validating partners and your, committing to your vision as a entrepreneur, or even just as a regular worker, and priorities? Like, where does that all intersect for you?
Dang, it was like 20 questions combined into one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is not even about probably like entrepreneurship or like providing for your family. Like this is much bigger than that. I mean, but it all boils down to like, what do you really care about? Like, what is your priorities in your life, right? Like, as a Christian, right? Like, my priority should be God. Like, there is no God, then family, then like it's just God. Like, there you can only have one priority in your life, and like that should be the sole driving source. Um, because that's why they have that Bible verse, like you can't serve God and money, because you only have one master, and like that's it. Like you only have one thing that is driving your life. Like, of course, life throws so many things at you, but you have to know what it is that you really care about, because again, like we only have so much time in a day, and that prioritization is so key, because if you have something else ruling your life, that's the thing that you're going to base all of your other decision making on, and it's the thing that you're going to invest the most time in. And so if we look at like our parents' generation, right, like Gen X, most of the fathers in the households back then focused on career and work and providing the family. But a side effect is that they didn't spend a lot of time with their children and their kids. And so there's like a recent stat that came out. It was like 74% of millennial dads spend more time with their children than their own dads did with them. And so I don't think the two are mutually exclusive when we're talking about work and relationships. Like if you're married, or if you're like looking to date. But I think this, to answer your question, like I think it straddles between like what you're focused on in terms of work, as well as like the importance of how do you build and grow like a relationship that you have with your partner. And on the work side, like again, like I don't think it's mutually um I don't think it's mutually exclusive. Like I think you can still provide for your family and be ambitious while still being a great partner for for your spouse. And I mean, on the work side, it's all about time management, right? Like how I said, like I skipped on the happy hour event that I had, really wanted to go to yesterday. I just said, I can miss one. Like it's fine. Like there'll always be more networking events there, but I only have one fiance. I only have one partner, and I'd rather spend that time with her and her friends that wanted to meet me and like get to know more, right? And on the relationship side, I think love is a funny thing, right? Like, I mean, you got like so many people out there talking about dating, relationships. There's like counselors, but I think from a Christian perspective, right? Like love is selfless, and for me, like love, love is very easily twisted to be self of like self. What am I trying to say? Like it's very easy to view love as like, oh, I want to do things that satisfy my desire or my wants and needs. But love is the opposite, especially as like a believer. Like love is to care about someone else, to pour into someone else, to talk to them and serve them in the way that they feel loved the most. You probably heard of like love languages, right? With like, physical touch, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service. Am I missing one? I forgot I'm missing one, but yeah, like
Gift giving.
yeah, giving gifts. But like if you like, for example, I am like acts of service. I think I gotta retake that test, but acts of service, quality time, and I know Alicia is words of affirmation. Like obviously, I logically speaking, the way like I'm gonna think in terms of like spending time with Alicia, like serving Alicia, right? Like even this concept of like providing for your family is an acts of service. But if she only feels love through words of affirmation and I don't give a single compliment in like when I get married and like for years, like like what does she expect? Like she's probably gonna like hate me. She's not gonna feel loved. It could lead to very bad things. And so I don't think it's a question of like work versus not work. I think it's like work and you have a partner beside you who, in theory, right, like is there to support you. Like I hope you're I hope you're with your partner because they already do support you and they also want to serve you in the ways that they can support you, right? Like that's their way of showing love. But it goes two ways. Like you have to also do that for them, and right, like only you know best what your partner wants and needs, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to provide both financial and provisions for them as well as emotional support and providing them in that area as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a topic that can just keep going deeper. But unfortunately, we're running out of time today. Um, yeah, I think in the future, though, it would be really interesting to talk a little bit more about faith, maybe uh, artificial general intelligence a little bit.
Yeah,
Maybe
don't
relationships.
even go to like Bitcoin or something because there's gonna be a podcast dedicated to that.
Right. But you are creating your own content these days, getting more into that arena. So, where can people find you if they want to learn more about some entrepreneurship or
Yeah.
real estate, personal finance type
Yeah,
stuff?
so I mean, we didn't really touch upon it, but after I closed down the Airbnb, I started another real estate business with one of my friends in LA. So yeah, you can find us on Instagram at John and Pat, JonandPat. Um, and yeah, it's my friend Patrick. He's out in Orange, California. He's a real estate agent over there, and so met him actually through my fiance, and yeah, we started a business last August, and yeah, not to go too deep into it, but we started going into wholesaling, and that is our focus right now. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's basically a lot of sales and a lot of marketing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time, for being a great landlord and mentor in my life with the business
And friend,
aspect
and
stuff.
friend. Thanks for having
And
me on.
friend. And yeah, so would you like to conclude this episode with any words of advice for the people that may be listening?
I'll conclude with the advice that I have settled on as part of my, I guess, goals for 2024. And that is whatever you decide you want to accomplish, decide and commit to it with focus. We talked about commitment a lot, but focus on all the steps that it takes to reach the goals that you set for this year, and focus without any wavering, any kind of shining object you see on your path. Ignore all shiny objects and just focus on that one goal that you have set for yourself.
Wow, beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and until next time.
Thanks, David.